am telling everybody now that the meeting is being recorded. So anybody who's listening to the recording later, you missed the first minute and a half. In any case, two things that we notice in this teaching. Moses, that the Torah is described as just generic teaching, and that somehow writing the Torah, or that the Torah itself is supposed to be a protection. That how is Joshua supposed to know that he is legitimate? How are they supposed to know that they are a people? Well, they have this Torah that they're carrying around with them. We have that same idea of Torah as something that you're carrying around and gives guidance and gives you legitimacy in the first chapter of the book of Joshua. God's invocation, God's charge to Joshua includes the words, Rak chazak ve'ematz ma'od, just be very strong and resolute, to observe faithfully all the teaching, lishmor la'asot kechol haTorah. Again, that word teaching is Torah. Observe all the teaching that my servant Moses enjoined upon you. Do not deviate it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Let not this book of the teaching cease from your lips. Lo yamush Safra haTorah hazeh mipicha, but recite it day and night, so that you may observe faithfully all that is written in it. Only then will you prosper in your understandings. Only then will you be successful. So Torah is what guides you. Just a text that I like to quote a lot at the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism. This is not on the text sheet, but the story is told that the Romans were surrounding Jerusalem as they were about to destroy the city, and everybody knew that Jerusalem would fall. It is said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at that time had his students place him in a coffin so they could sneak out of the city. And they went to Hadrian, who was the leader of the Roman troops. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai stood before him. He said, "Emperor, O emperor." Hadrian looked at him and said, "I'm not the emperor." He said, "Yes, but you're going to become the emperor soon." Sure enough, according to the Talmud, the people came on the horses at that moment, and they said, they said, "The emperor just died. Hadrian, you are now the new emperor." Hadrian got so excited that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had been correct in this prophecy that he said, "I'm going to grant you a wish." And he said, grant 3 wishes, but they're all really combined in one. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, but he said, "I want you to give me a place where we can study Torah." It is said that Hadrian gave them the city of Yavna at that moment, and that's where Rabbi Yochanan established the first yeshiva, and from that moment as well, Torah became what held the Jewish people together. For the first millennia of our history, the temple and the sacrificial cult made us a people, made us a community. Torah became the united force. And so it's in that context that I look to really what are going to become the core of our study today, almost bookends. Almost everything we're going to study is going to be bookends between the first and second Mishnahs of Pirkei Avot. So at the bottom of this first page, the first Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai, umesara liYehoshua v'Yehoshua lizkenim l'nevi'im u'nevi'im mesaruha la'anshei knesset hagdola. Moses received Torah on Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. The first thing I want you to notice, if you received the sheets from me ahead of time, I had it incorrectly translated. I said Moses received the Torah on Sinai. The truth is, it doesn't say Moses received HaTorah. It says Moses received Torah, and that's what he transmitted. And the question is, what did he receive? The tradition is that Moses received not only the Torah, the 5 books that we know, and not only just the Tanakh, the entire Bible, but Moses received the written law and the oral law. And that's what he transmitted to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets transmitted it to the men of the Great Assembly. I'm going to unpause for just, or unmute everybody for just a second, just to ask the question, who are the members of the Great Assembly?
Shimon HaTzadik.
Well, I'm going to take the silence to be the correct answer, because, actually it looks like, well, I don't know what happened. But anyway, we have no idea who the members of the Great Assembly were, but they somehow were the connection between the Bible and between the rabbinic tradition that was passed on. And they are the purveyors of the oral law. We okay to hear? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. When we talk about Torah, our tradition talks about two different Torahs. We have the Torah shebichtav, the written Torah, and what's called Torah sheba'al peh, the oral Torah. A very famous teaching from Leviticus Rabbah, from Vayikra Rabbah. It's based on a verse from Vayikra about anyone slaughtering an ox or a goat or a sheep and having to bring it to the temple to be sacred slaughter, but that's not really what is there. So we have a verse. This is the way that Midrash works. The greatest advantage in all the land is his. In context, it is Ecclesiastes being Ecclesiastes. The context is, if you see in a province oppression of the poor and suppression of right and justice, don't wonder at the fact. For one high official is protected by a higher one, and both of them by still higher ones. Thus the greatest advantage in all the land is his. He controls a field that is cultivated. In context, Ecclesiastes is probably saying that one should expect powerful people to exercise power in unjust ways. That's just the way that the world works. But if you are reading the JPS translation, which is true there, it has one of the most common notes in all of that translation, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. What does it mean? What does it mean that the greatest advantage in all the land is his? So the rabbis take that verse, the greatest advantage in all the land is his, and they translate the words slightly differently. They translate them so that Yitron means an extra thing, and so they translate the words to say, the extra things in the land are included with all other creations, created by the king for the field. The extra things in the land are included with all creation. And so Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah give two different interpretations of the verse. Rabbi Yehuda taught that it means even things that you see and wonder what purpose they have in the world. We talk about some sort of a fibrous substance that's used to make ropes, or some particular kind of a twig for hedging gardens. Even those little things, even ants, provide benefit to the world. That's kind of one context. And Rabbi Nehemiah takes it in a different, which is more germane to our subject. Rabbi Nehemiah taught, what does it mean these extra things are also for creation? Even things that appear superfluous to the gift of Torah, like tzitzit, to fill in mezuzah, even these are included in the gift of Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda talked about creations, Rabbi Nehemiah talks about Torah. And then the Midrash goes on in this third paragraph to expand on that idea. We read a verse from Deuteronomy chapter 9. And the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God, and written upon them the exact words that the Lord had addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. Now this is how Midrash works. It's not just, the rabbis say, that the Lord gave me the 2 tablets exactly that he had spoken, but we're going to take certain words. So the text says, Va alehem ketuvim, and upon these tablets were written. It doesn't say on it was written, it says and. The exact words. It doesn't say kol hadvarim, but it says ke kol hadvarim, the exact words. It doesn't just say dvarim, it says the dvarim hadvarim. And so we are going to expand on these little extra words and say that this means that Scripture, Mishnah, Talmud, additional legends, and even that which a good student will one day recite before his teacher, even a good question that somebody's going to ask today, that was all spoken to Moses on Sinai. As it says, another verse from Ecclesiastes, sometimes there is a phenomenon of which they say, look, this one is new. It occurred long since in ages that went before us. Here we have a very limited idea of what it means that Moses passed the entire Torah at Sinai, that you think that there's room for interpretation, you think that there are new ideas. Moses got it all. There is nothing under the sun. Lest we think that that's the only way to interpret what it means that Moses received more than just the written Torah, we have another text which gives a different idea. And I'm going to present that text, and then we're going to try to pause for some questions. So this is another famous midrash that some of you might be familiar with, which comes from the Talmud from Menachot. And it refers to Moses sitting up on Sinai. We're on text number 2. Rav Yehuda taught in the name of Rav, when Moses ascended to heaven, he found the Holy One sitting and affixing the crowns to the letters. If you've ever looked in a Torah scroll, you know that there are certain letters, Shatnez, Gat, Shin, Ayin, Tet, Nun, Zayin, Gimel, and Taf, that when those letters are written, we have a little crown put above the letter. And the tradition is that even those little crowns are significant, right? There's a specific way that you write the Torah. So the rabbis imagine Moses sitting there and writing those little crowns on his little Torah scroll. And he said, ruler of the universe, Ribono Shel Olam, who is forcing your hand? Why are we doing this? God said, there will be a man several generations from now named Akiva ben Yosef, and he will interpret from every jot and tittle mountains of halacha. Moses continued, ruler of the universe, show him to me. God said, turn around. So Moses had his right. It's the first instance of time travel in the Talmud. Moses went and sat down behind 8 rows of students. He did not understand what they were saying, and he became dejected. But then they came to one particular matter of law, and one of the students asked, Rabbi, how do you know this? And the teacher said, it's a law given to Moses at Sinai, Halacha Moshe Sinai. And Moses was appeased. Suddenly, Moses understands Halacha Moshe Sinai, a law given that even Moses didn't know all the things that he was given at that moment. He returned before the Holy One and said, ruler of the universe, you have a person like that, like Akiva, and you want to give the Torah to me? God replied, silence, for such is my will. And the text does continue, because then Moses says, well, what happens to this guy? And God says, oh, look, and you see Akiva being flayed by the Romans. It ends on a dejected note. But you have 2 different ideas, or 2 different versions of this idea that Moses received more than the Torah that we know, right? More than Vizot HaTorah on Sinai. In the first case, it's a very limiting idea. Don't think that you've come up with anything new. Don't think that you have anything to add to the discussion, because anything that you taught was already given to Moses on Sinai. The second case is a very liberating view of this. If you are interpreting Torah, if you come up with something, if you're unsure of yourself because your interpretation of the law seems novel, well, the rabbis are telling you that that also came from Moses. Even though Moses may not even understand what you're talking about as Torah, that all came from Moses. The Torah commentary, Or HaChaim, who's 17th century, and I'm looking for my notes here because I had the exact dates. But it can't matter that much. In any case, he says, how is this possible that you have these two ideas that all the Torah was given to Moses on Sinai and Moses didn't understand it? And the way that he resolves the two texts is to say, well, Moses was given secrets on Sinai. God gave it all because that's the power of God, but it's not like it was all understood. And our job still is to uncover Torah. So I want to pause, and I'm going to unmute everybody. And if you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, we're going to try it just by saying whoever wants to shout out. Let's see if that works. It's not that big of a conference call. We'll take a couple of comments.
I wanted to say something about Rabbi Akiva. It's a very famous story, and it's wonderful to hear it again, and we wrote it very well. I just started reading a book about Rabbi Akiva that was written by Rabbi. Are you familiar with it, Rabbi?
Close to the microphone.
Can you turn the microphone on? I have to stand over. Okay. Okay. I said that your teaching of the mass midrash about Rabbi Akiva and Moshe Rabbeinu being in the yeshiva and learning from Rabbi Akiva was very interesting. It's a very famous story, and you taught it very well. There is a new book that Rabbi Reuven Hammer just wrote about Rabbi Akiva. Are you familiar with that book?
I'm not yet. I'm familiar with Rabbi Reuven Hammer, though, so I need to be familiar.
Okay. All right, so you'll be familiar with it when I come visit in September. So it's a wonderful story, and I think it applies very well to our movement, and that we don't stop thinking about how the development of Torah, the ideas of Torah that are developing here in the, even into the 21st century, and we haven't stopped looking at how halakha can be revised and looked at it from different perspectives, and unlike where many people think that everything ends with the Shulchan Aruch in the 17th century. So I think that this teaching here is appropriate for all of us living on two sides of the ocean, and how we look at halakha and how we look at Torah.
Thank you.
What's the name of the book?
Excuse me?
What's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Akiva, War, Legacy, and Legend, I believe. It's a wonderful book, and I'd be happy to take orders on behalf of Rabbi Hammer. It's a story about, I don't want to get too much into Rabbi Akiva because that's a little bit off the subject, but I'd be happy to correspond with you and give you information.
So maybe when we send a little bit of a recap after this session, we can include information about the book. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so if there aren't more questions about what I've done so far, I want to shift gears slightly and to talk about another way that Torah has been expanded. The midrash that I'm about to quote from Genesis Rabbah, a lot of times when people hear a text like this, their first instinct is to take it literally and say, oh, that can't be true. And then I say, well, wait a minute. One of the points of midrash is to teach an idea. The rabbis weren't silly. They didn't take it literally. But look at how this is another idea of Torah, that it wasn't written by Moses on Sinai, but that it existed for thousands of years before even the world was created. One of the things that's really neat about midrash is that it's not just old wives' tales in the sense that the rabbis aren't just making this stuff up. They are remarkably consistent in the ideas, like the 904 generations, which repeat themselves in different places in the midrash, and also they are consistent in the way they use verses. You can't just make something up. You have to have a verse to support you. And so this particular text from Genesis Rabbah which is one of the oldest midrashim around the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, explaining the opening words of Torah. And it begins with the words, Rabbi Hoshaya Patach. Rabbi Hoshaya opened with the words. This is a particular form of midrash. If anybody was in B'nai Israel this past Shabbat, I referred to the idea known as a petichta, where you take it's a form of sermon, where you take a verse from the later parts of Scripture, usually a verse that the audience isn't so familiar with, in this case Proverbs, and you explain it in a way that brings you back to the verse that has to do with Parshat HaShavua. So Rabbi Hoshaya starts with a verse from Proverbs chapter 8, and we know, because he's giving the sermon about Breshit, that he's going to end up talking about Breshit. So Proverbs is wisdom literature, and when the rabbis talk about wisdom, they mean Torah. When God fixed the foundations of the earth, wisdom was with him as a confidant, Amun. And the interpretive question that the rabbis are asking is, what is this word Amun, confidant? And they change the letters around, the two middle letters, and say, don't read Amun, which means a confidant, read Oman, an artisan. And oh, by the way, don't read wisdom with a lowercase w, read wisdom with a capital W, which means Torah. So what does this mean? When he fixed the foundations of the earth, Torah was with him as an artisan. The Torah declares, I was the tool, Kli Omanuto. I was the tool of the Holy Blessed One. It is common practice that when a human king builds a palace, he does it not according to his own conception, but according to that of an architect. The architect, in turn, does not work off the top of his head, but he uses plans and diagrams to figure out where to put the rooms and the doorways. Thus did the Holy Blessed One consult the Torah when creating the world. And when the Torah says, in the beginning, God created, Bereshit, it means with Reshit, Bereshit, God created. For Reshit always refers to the Torah itself, as in another verse from Proverbs, the Lord created me at the beginning of his course as the first of his works of old. Right? Or you could read it differently. The Lord created me, Reshit, as the first of his works of old. I just want to point out the brilliance of how they come up with this idea that the Torah existed and that God used the Torah to create the world. If we look at the Hebrew word, Bereshit, right, in the beginning God created, is a problematic word, actually. The Torah begins with a word that doesn't make sense grammatically. If those words, Bereshit bara Elohim, really mean in the world, God, or in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, right? That's how you know, by the way, that baseball was the first thing that was created, because in the beginning, God created heavens and earth, right? But if it means that, the text should have said Bereshit, in the beginning. If you're familiar with the New JPS translation of the Torah, it follows actually Rashi's translation. It doesn't say in the beginning God created heaven. It says when God created the heavens and the earth being formless and void, which would be reading it as Bereshit baro instead of Bereshit bara. Bereshit baro Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In any case, either way, whether it's in the beginning, Bereshit, or it's when God began to create, Bereshit baro, there is a problem with that first word of Torah, Bereshit. And the rabbis pick up on that also, and they say, midrashically, right? They didn't mean this literally, but they say midrashically, that word ba, that preposition which can be in, also means with. So don't read, in the beginning God created, but rather read, with Reshit, God created the world. And Reshit always refers to Torah. This text that I have marked as number 4 has a similar idea, right? Right? That the sages taught for 974 generations before he created the world The Holy Blessed One sat and studied and researched and refined and checked every last word of the Torah 248 times, corresponding to the 248 parts of the human body, before setting them all in place in his Torah, as Scripture says, the word of the Lord are pure words, silver purged in an earthen crucible, refined sevenfold. It was only then that a word could be set in place in his Torah. If it had been slightly out of place, it might have brought about the destruction of the whole world. Again, your first instinct when you look at a text like this is to say, what are you talking about? First of all, where do you get 974 generations? And second of all, what do you mean that's 248 parts of the human body? I don't think that the rabbis were taking it literally, but I do want to say that they are remarkably consistent again. That number 974 appears in other midrashim. Some of you have studied with me before, and we've seen that text there. And that number 248, being the number of parts of the human body, is also recurrent. Just one or two quick examples. There are 245 words in the Shema, and then we repeat 3 words at the end, adding up to 248. Why? Because the rabbi said that we should be thinking that it's with our entire body that we are proclaiming the oneness of God. Another idea, which I actually meant to give you the text, but I think I forgot to. We know there are 613 commandments in the Torah. Why 613? Well, they say 248 positive commandments to correspond with the number of parts of the body, 365 negative commandments to correspond to the days of the year. Again, 613 means our entire body should care about the mitzvot for the entire year. It's a spiritual number. And again, you can see that the Midrash uses that verse from from Psalms that says refined sevenfold, and say Torah is really powerful. So here again, you have this idea that the Torah is not just what we study, but it's a mystical thing. It has extra power, powerful enough to create the world. And again, before I get what I think is the kicker reading in text number 5, I want to pause to see if anybody, particularly people who are sitting on the phone, if anybody has any question about anything that we've done so far, or any comments. Well, maybe somebody on the phone will just prove that you're listening.
Right. No, we're discussing your use of the word Bereshit Aro and not Bereshit Bara. Okay, we're not familiar with that kind. Is the ro ever used anyplace else? Or we're not familiar with.
Yeah, so that is taken from the first Rashi, in Torah, where he has problem with the word Bereshit, and maybe I can even pull it up very, very quickly and show you. If you are looking, if you see it on my screen, which I think you might, Bereshit bara ein hamidrash hazeh omer ela dorsheni. This text cries out for interpretation.
The opening comment.
Afkan ata omer Bereshit bara Elohim kemo Bereshit bero. It is like when God began to create. V'domelo tchilat diberes Hosea, and it's they use another verse to do that kind of idea. This is the beginning of when God created the world, and it is the translation that the JPS uses for their text.
Okay. No, but for Rome, it seems
Same thing, yeah.
well,
Yes, you can.
All right, should I move on?
Question.
yeah,
Yeah, question.
yeah, we're,
Question?
okay.
I have a question, Mickey.
Yes.
At the beginning. The first verse, it says that God gave Moses the Torah. But then it says Moses wrote the Torah and gave it to Joshua. How come? Why he didn't give Joshua the Torah that he already received?
Right. Well, so I mean, I think that you're really speaking to the larger piece, right? In some ways, the Torah talks as if God gave the Torah, right, written in fire, and in some places it says that Moses wrote the Torah, and that is sort of a different piece, right? Did Moses just sit and listen to what was given by God on Sinai, or did Moses sort of internalize whatever kind of revelation he had and write it himself? My answer to your question, which I don't know if it's completely satisfying, is to say, just like Torah doesn't mean the 5 books here, it's something much bigger, right? Moses gave some sort of instruction to Joshua, any leader handing over the reins would be, but it wasn't like he literally handed him a Torah scroll, right? And that the underscoring message of this text is that Torah is much bigger than we look at, because we make it much bigger. And so I read that verse of Moses writing it and giving it to Joshua is Moses giving him the keys to the kingdom. Moses giving him his own thoughts. The interpretation of Torah, the passing of Torah, is much more important than the words on the page.
Now, one more thing. Joshua is the only one that born in Egypt and entered the land, right? It means that everybody, 40 years, that nobody of those people who went from Egypt, they all died at age very young.
Well, the Torah says that the entire generation died out, that they weren't ready to enter the land. There was a punishment for the spies, and that, yeah, you're correct.
But Caleb ben Yefuneh, actually, why he didn't get the prize to go with Joshua?
No, Caleb did.
He brought positive opinion about the land.
No, Caleb did. So I'll correct you a little bit that you said it was not just Joshua made it, but Caleb and Joshua were the two.
Right.
So the second to last text that I wanted to show you builds on this idea that Torah existed before God, before the universe, and in my mind, right, in this idea that God didn't just write the Torah, God used the Torah to create the world, and this brings it in another direction, and in some ways brings us full circle. From the Zohar, and I found this text elsewhere. I'm not a scholar on Zohar, but it's from this book, Standing at Sinai, or in Hebrew, Atem Ra'item. When the Blessed One decided to create the world, he looked at the Torah, at each and every word, and he fashioned the world accordingly. For all the words and deeds of all the worlds are contained in the Torah. And so the Holy Blessed One looked at it when creating the world. It's not that the Torah itself created the world, but that God, looking at the Torah, created it. And then I skipped the next paragraph. It says, so God read the word, let there be light, and then suddenly light was created. God said, oh, that's a good idea, let's create light. And God said, let's separate the word, right? So God got his ideas from Torah. But this piece, again, all the words and deeds of all the worlds are contained in the Torah, that somehow there is a mystical power to Torah and to study itself. Well, I'll get to the other piece that I was going to say with it in just a second. Now here's the kicker. Once the world was created, though, it could not have been sustained had it not occurred to the divine will to create human beings who would engage in the study of Torah, for the sake of which the world would be sustained. Now, those who delve into the Torah and engage in its study are as if they sustain the whole world. Just as the Holy Blessed One looked into the Torah and created the world, human beings look into it and sustain the world. The entire world is thus both made and sustained by the Torah. Therefore, happy are they who engage in the study of Torah, for they are upholding the world. This, to me, right, is the. I love this piece because it's not just saying, right, that the Torah has a mystical value for God, and you say, oh, that's ridiculous. God looked in and made blueprint to create the world, but that our study of Torah makes us partners with God in uncovering mystical worlds, right? That we have a role in this process, and that when we study Torah, we are partners with God in a mystical way. I'm actually trying to put together words for a sermon for this coming Shabbat, because there is an idea that studying Torah is not just you're bringing understanding, but even when you don't understand, even when you just read the words, even when you sit in the synagogue and read words of the Siddur extending from Torah and don't understand the words, but you're moved by them, that is participating in this process. I'm not advocating the Kabbalah Center or these kinds of Madonna-type Kabbalah, but there is, I read about one group that can't possibly understand the Aramaic of the Zohar, but they read it anyway because somehow they're moved by the words. I don't want to get too far into that because in general I like to be a rationalist, but I like this idea that Torah study is greater than the sum of parts. Maybe it's true, I don't know who's listening on the line here, but even if you're not listening to every word, even if you don't get every word, somehow we are participating. And that brings new meaning. I said this whole study is bookended by the first two Mishnahs in Pirkei Avot. The second Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, also a famous text, Shimon HaTzadik, a member of the Great Assembly, used to say, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omeid, the world stands on three things: on Torah, on service to God, and acts of loving kindness. What does it mean, right? In the Zohar's reading of what it means that the world stands on Torah, it means that we, through our process of study, through our process of interpreting, we keep the world around. That Moses may have received the entire Torah on Sinai, including the oral Torah, but don't think of the idea that he received what I'm about to teach. Don't think of that as limiting. Think of that as liberating. That that's justifying that anything any teacher or any student will interpret into Torah, that's legitimate. That's what Torah is all about. That actually sustains the world. I'm going to stop just by giving a story that I love about a teacher at the seminary. Rabbi Morris, oh, it's terrible, I'm forgetting his name, it'll come to me in just a second. In any case, studied in the Chachmei Lublin, studied in Poland from when he was at a young age, and he once visited a Hebrew school class of 7th graders, and one of the students said, oh, it's Morris Shapiro, said, Rabbi Shapiro, your son, who happened to be their teacher, says, your son tells me you studied the entire Talmud several times. He says, yes, it's true. So you must know parts of it by heart. You must have done it. Why do you study it every day? Why do you continue to study if you've already been through it? And Rabbi Shapiro looked at him and said, yes, it's true that I studied the Torah many times. I studied the Talmud many times. And when I study it, the words don't change. But he said the interpretations change. I'm moved by the interpretations. And that, when we say that the world stands on Torah, it stands from the continued interpretation of the Torah, every little bit that we learn. And that's why it's so important to have opportunities like this to share our Torah across the continents. So there are about 10 minutes left, and I'm really, really hoping that somebody will react a little bit to what we've been saying to each other.
Mickey, one little question about the Torah and Avodah. Avodah is the Avodah on the Torah or real Avodah? It means work?
So traditionally you would say that Avodah means study, right? Or sorry, means worship. That Avodah like Avodat, like Avodah in the temple. But I know growing up on Beit Hashita that in your mind, it's also the avodah of the Zionists working Monday,
I wish
Tuesday,
it
right?
was right
Sure,
up.
why not?
First of all, I want to say that I don't know if I'm speaking for everyone here, that I'm very glad to hear that you forgot your professor's last name, because all of us here have senior moments, and looking at you much younger, it's not just at our age that we have these moments. That's comment number one. Comment number two is the story of Lo Bashamayim Hi, that there was a dispute amongst the rabbis as to how a particular halacha should be interpreted. And one rabbi, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer, who says that if the law is according to me, that this carob tree will uproot and go fly off 100 meters or a certain distance, and the tree does that. And another miracle occurs, and the rabbis say, well, we don't listen to what happens to a tree. And then the Rabbi Eliezer says, if the law is according to me, then this river will flow in the opposite direction, and that happens too. And the rabbis say, well, we don't listen to what happens to a river flowing in the opposite direction. And then there are a couple other examples. And finally, Rabbi Eliezer says that a voice will come from heaven, and a voice comes from heaven and says that Rabbi Eliezer is correct, and the rabbis say, Lo Bashamayim. It's not in the heavens, that the interpretation of halakha and the interpretation of Torah and Talmud is by us, the Jewish people, by the people of Israel. You told the story about this Rabbi Shapira. It reminded me of the story of, we lost him. Yeah, still here?
Yeah, you're here.
Yeah, okay. We sort of lost you for a second. There we go. The story I heard about Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who was, my understanding, not an easy man to study with, a brilliant man, a wonderful teacher, but not an easy man to study with. And the story of the Rabbi Kaplan, Professor Kaplan, was that he taught Parshat HaShavua, and he taught it on Monday morning, and then a student would give a Devar Torah on Parshat HaShavua on Thursday morning. On Monday morning, he taught something, and the student recorded what Professor Kaplan had said. And on Thursday morning, he proceeded to give the exact Devar Torah that Rabbi Kaplan had said. And Rabbi Kaplan tore it apart. And the student said, but Professor Kaplan, this is the same Devar Torah that you gave on Monday morning. And Kaplan responded, but I've matured since then. Okay, so just as in a nicer way, Rabbi Shapiro seemed to have said that I may have learned something once or twice or even 3 times, but we grow each time we read it. It reminds me of many children's stories that we all read to our children and grandchildren, whether it's the Giving Tree or whatever else. Sometimes we read, or the Little Prince. We can read that in 8th grade, and we can read it as adults, and it means something every other time that we read it.
That's great.
Tell them what the ladies said at Television University. Go ahead. No?
Can you hear?
Yeah, can you hear?
Yes.
Right, no, I just want to tell you something that we were at Television University last night for the graduation ceremony of our son and daughter-in-law, who both got their master's degrees. And the keynote speech was given by a lady who's a professor of Jewish studies there, and she carried on from where you left off here. She was talking about within the various sources, once we have to decide something, then how's it decided between us? Is it the process, decision making, who's going to be in charge and who's not going to be in charge? and then how that's carried out. And obviously, there's a lot of theoretical stuff spoken about minor bismolo, about what's right and what's left. And if the rabbis say it's left and you know it's right, never mind, you've got to go on the left. A lot of it was theoretical, and it came back to more of power play than anything else. So there's a lot in the sources about that and stuff, some of which is applicable today and some of which is very interesting theoretically. But we've moved on from that as well. Or as Arnie said, we've become more mature. Or not.
That's great. Well, listen, I really enjoy the opportunity to do this. I'm a little bit freaked out by sort of this feeling of talking to the camera and not sure when everybody's listening, but I am going to send an email to all the participants kind of asking for your feedback and asking for your ideas. As I said, on the B'nai Israel end, I want to be able to offer this kind of webinar service more often, and so your feedback is really important. And I'm looking forward to next Thursday. Rabbi Bender is going to be teaching When Is It Okay to Lie, which is an important topic. And actually, I just saw Jewish Lights just published a book with almost the exact same title. I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, I just wanted to make one comment that we're sitting here, about 10 or 12 of us here around the table in our shul, and we have a couple people who are online in their apartment here in Ramot, and we're all very pleased to be part of this study session. This is something that Rabbi Safra and I did not come up with on our own. It was something that we felt it was very important to do in the context of a growing sense of a need to for our congregations, which have been twinned, as Rabbi Safra said earlier, for about 15 years, but because of the new technology and our personal feelings of the need to bring our congregations closer together, Rabbi Safra brought a group to Israel last year, and hope that we'll be visiting again with many other members of B'nai Israel. And this is also part of the conservative movement and the Masorti movements. Again, importance of our communities staying in touch and maintaining the dialogue of Torah overseas. So we look forward to studying again next week with all of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that'll end the call, and we'll sign off. Have a great rest of the day.
Okay, thank you. Bye, Shabbat Shalom to everyone.
Bye.